everyone. Welcome back to M&A Plus, The Art After the Deal. I'm Lisa Scott, and today's episode is all about something very simple, but completely game-changing, asking better questions. Joining me today is Bob Tiede, a leadership expert and best-selling author of Leading with Questions, one of the top leadership books out there. Bob's newest book, the third edition of Leading with Questions, shows why the best leaders aren't the ones with all the answers. They're the ones who know how to ask the right questions. And avoiding questions means losing opportunities to learn. Through practical techniques, real-world stories, and simple tools anyone can use, Bob teaches leaders how to build trust, uncover hidden opportunities, and multiply their impact simply by getting better at asking and listening. So welcome to the show, Bob. Your books are great.
Lisa, I'm delighted to be your guest today.
Yeah, great. I'm glad to have you. And I especially love your take on shifting leadership mindset from control to discovery, empowerment, and growth. And I wanted to also point out that I'm a big fan of the little book that I found that I got in the mail. And it has so many profound insights. And I did not realize that listen and silent use the same letters. So that was one of the takeaways that I got from this book, which is interesting. I never thought about it, never really noticed that. But first, how did you start focusing on questions as a topic? And kind of what's your background and how did your journey begin?
Well, Lisa, great question. Whenever I speak, I start with a confession. And my confession is that for most of my career, I was a benevolent dictator. My only paradigm of leadership was I thought the job of a leader was to figure out what needs to be done and then to ask your staff to do what you figured out needs to be done. I did say benevolent. I grew up in a home where I was taught to say please and thank you. So Lisa, if you'd been on my team, I don't think I ever would have said, hey, Lisa, go do this. It'd have been more like, hey, Lisa, here's what we're working on. It'd really be great if you could please do this. And when you did it, I would have said, thank you at a staff meeting. Lisa, stand up. You all need to hear what Lisa did. And Lisa, I'm not suggesting we got nothing done, but I am confessing my only paradigm of leadership was thinking the job of a leader is to figure out what needs to be done and then tell your staff what to do. Now, you asked when that changed. I just happened to have the book that changed my leadership forever. This was the first edition of Leading with Questions by Dr. Michael McWhort. Now, Lisa, probably like you, I see all the books behind you. I love books. I love leadership books. And my wife, Sherry, loves to go to Barnes & Noble. She goes all over the store. She knows when she's done, she'll still find me in the leadership section. And my habit is to try to find 2-3 books I've never seen before, pull them off the shelf, find a chair, sit down, peruse them to see if anyone's going home. Well, in 2006, when I found this book, perusing only a few pages, I said, hey, this one's going home. And it was a page turner. Lisa, it was filled with stories of leaders literally from around the globe who were leading with questions. And as I read it, I had only one question. Why hasn't anyone ever shared this paradigm of leadership with me before? I mean, I became an instant convert. It instantly made sense that a leader who leads questions would be so much more effective. So, Lisa, that's when the journey started, 2006.
Right. Good. Well, that's interesting. So one of the antidotes kind of you give is you can teach anyone to start leading with questions in 30 seconds and become a better listener in 8 seconds. So my first answer to that in my head was, oh, well, I'll just not say anything for 8 seconds. Then I'm automatically a better listener, right? Just give it 8 seconds. But how does that work?
Which one? 30 seconds or 8 seconds?
Yeah, start with the 30 seconds and then the 8 seconds.
Well, again, Lisa, whenever I speak, I sense from my audience that they'd like to learn to lead with questions, but they imagine they'll have to get a master's degree in questionology. Like, nice idea, but I don't know if I'll ever get there. Like it'd be nice to become a brain surgeon, but I don't know of any course where you can become a brain surgeon in 30 seconds. So when I ask my audience, who here would like to learn to lead with questions in 30 seconds, every hand goes up. And then I pick one of them. Lisa, today you're my audience. So I'm going to pick you. And I ask them to come up, stand next to me. And as they come up, I say, I picked Lisa because I think she has a photographic memory. And, the person coming up always kind of shakes their head like, no, I don't. And I say, I think you do. And I say, here's how it's going to work. I have a second hand on my watch, and clock will start when I say my first favorite question. I'm going to share all four. I'm then going to say, Lisa, do you have them memorized? You will. And I'll say, Lisa, share them with us. And upon you sharing all four successfully, the clock ends. So, Lisa, are you ready?
Okay.
Here we go. My first favorite question is, what do you think? Second, what else? Third, what else? Fourth, what else? Lisa, do you have them memorized?
Yes.
Share them with us.
What do you think? What else? What else? What else?
Oh my goodness. I think that was 13 seconds, a new world record. Now, Lisa, some that are listening will certainly be just a little skeptical, like, Bob, you can't ask somebody, what do you think? What else? What else? What else? And I said, well, not in that rapid fashion. First, Lisa, you would add a topic to the what do you think? Hey, what do you think we ought to do about? What do you think we ought to do to take advantage of this opportunity or solve this challenge? There'll be some topic. And Lisa, when you ask, they're going to answer. Now, research shows that when we're asked to give our opinion on something, we instinctively roll out a safe answer. We're kind of testing the waters. And so if I say, Lisa, what do you think about? And you give me that first answer. If I say, well, Lisa, that's dumb. Everyone knows that. Well, you're sorry you answered. I'm not going to get anything more. In fact, next time I ask, I'll probably get nothing. But when I say, wow, Lisa, that's good. Well, what else? Well, Lisa, relax, or whoever is being asked, relax, thinks, wow, the person asking me appreciates my input, and they'll give me more. You'll give me more. And when you give that second answer, instead of just moving on, I'm likely to grab a pen and say, Lisa, I'm going to take notes. This is pure gold. Please continue. What else? And you'll give me more. I've discovered, Lisa, that it's actually the third and fourth question that gets to what I call their gold nugget, their very best thought. Now, we've all heard the proverbial story, of the old gold miner who mined for gold all his life looking for the gold vein. He never finds it. He quits. Somebody came along later and discovered the old miner was within 6 inches of the gold vein when he quit. Well, if you only ask somebody, what do you think, and get their first answer and move on, you're a bit like that old gold miner. You got close, but it's the what else's. Say more about that. Hey, I'm taking notes. Please continue. That gets to their gold nugget. Now, Lisa, remember the promise of this question was who would like to learn to lead with questions in 30 seconds? For anyone listening who's been like I was, the benevolent dictator, here's what I love about leading with questions. So many of the greatest questions are so simple. They're not long, complicated kind of things. Whatever the topic is, if you've been just telling staff what to do, next time, one-on-one with a staff member, with your team around your conference table, whatever the topic is, by just saying, hey, gang, hey, Lisa, what do you think we might do here? And then listen. And when they pause, say, wow, that's great. What else? And wow, please continue. Say more about that. You will move from being a leader who only leads by telling to leading with questions, just with these 4 questions. It's that simple.
Right. Okay. So before we get to the listening part, I have another comment to that. So I notice when you're talking about asking questions, your goal is really to get information. So I would think that the approach to the way that, not just the way that you ask the question, but the way that you hear the answer is super important. Otherwise, people are going to shut down. So maybe talk a little bit about the approach, not just to asking, but listening to the response. And I would venture to say that a genuine curiosity from you is probably going to help a lot, as opposed to you're just robotically asking a question to get a specific answer, right?
Lisa, you make such an important point. I say to people, if you don't intend to listen, don't ask a question. Our one granddaughter, now she's 17 and she no longer does this, but when she was 2, she has a habit of asking a question and running away before you could answer. We had to say, Claire, come on back here. You asked Grandpa a question. And so, like I say, if you ask a question, you've got to then listen. And, another question I ask people, Lisa, I'll ask you is, how have you felt whenever you've had a leader, someone you reported to, ask you, hey, Lisa, what do you think we ought to do here? How did their asking make you feel?
Yeah, definitely. It makes a difference. And it also makes a difference of whether I trust the person or how well I
Yes,
know the person,
sure.
as to how open of an answer I'm going to provide. Right. So
Yeah,
I think there's also a big part of building trust. I mean, asking the questions maybe are part of building trust, but there's also the opposite of that, build trust and establish yourself as a respected person with integrity so that you're able to have those conversations, get answers that even you aren't necessarily expecting. Don't expect the, the certain answers also, right?
yes, absolutely. In that little book you held up
Mm-hmm.
of
Love a book.
leading with question quotes, one of them in there, one of my favorite comes from Henry David Thoreau, when he said, the greatest compliment ever paid me was when one asked me for my input and then attended to my answer.
Mm-hmm.
And I just love the way you worded that. But
Mm-hmm.
it's like, yes, being asked, but then being listened to.
Mm-hmm.
We then feel valued.
Right.
And, if that's how we feel when we've had a leader ask us,
Mm-hmm.
I always say, well, how will your staff, how will your colleagues feel when you ask them? And of course, the same,
Mm-hmm.
they will feel valued.
Right.
And without you saying, hey, I want you to know I value you, just the
Mm-hmm.
act of asking and then listening
Mm-hmm.
will communicate, wow, Lisa values me.
Mm-hmm.
Bob values me.
Yeah, and even just more on the personal side, you actually feel loved if you're listened to also. I think
Yes,
that quote is in here
that's in there.
somewhere.
Yes. Being listened to and being loved are so
Mm-hmm.
close that the
Mm-hmm.
average person can't distinguish the difference.
Mm-hmm.
It's a powerful quote.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So how does someone become a better listener in 8 seconds?
Well, Lisa, like me, you're from Texas or live in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
What sport has an 8-second clock?
Oh no, I'm not very into sports. 8 second clock.
As soon as
Uh,
I tell you, you'll say, of course, bull riding.
oh, bull riding. Oh,
Yes.
okay.
And the 8-second clock is this: for a bull rider to have a qualified ride, they have to stay on the bull for eight
Mm-hmm.
seconds. Now, Lisa, you and I can think 8 seconds is like nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, again, you don't have to be a fan of the sport, but if you've ever watched flipping channels just for a little while, you quickly realize to a bull rider, 8 seconds is an eternity. And
Yes.
like 80% of the bull riders, and we're talking professional bull riders, Lisa, you and I are too smart to get on a bull, but a professional bull rider, 80% are knocked off in less than 8 seconds. And you're thinking, well, okay, Bob, that's bull riding. What's that have to do with listening? Here's something really fascinating. Research shows that the average person, when they ask a question of someone, that they only wait 2 or 3 seconds for an answer. If the other person doesn't answer in 2 or 3 seconds, that silence seems like an eternity.
Mm-hmm.
And the average person at 2 or 3 seconds will either answer the question themselves, ask another question, or just move on in the conversation. And the curious thing is with no self-awareness of what they've just done. And so becoming a better listener in 8 seconds is ask your question, keep comfortable eyesight, not intense, but comfortable, and count to yourself 1001, 1002.
Mm-hmm.
Lisa, there's times I've gotten to 1030, but the longer the silence, the better the answer.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, some questions are answered rapidly. If I was in your office, I say, Lisa, which way to the restroom? You're going to answer that instantly. But if I say, Lisa, I've got a question for you. What would you say has been one of your greatest failures that's actually led to one of your greatest successes? Now, if you've never been asked that question before, how helpful would it be if at 2 or 3 seconds I start talking again? Yeah,
Yeah.
not very helpful. But if I will give you silence and wait comfortably, I could well be the beneficiary of an
Hmm.
incredible story, an incredible piece of wisdom. But I have to wait.
Hmm.
Now,
So what if
Lisa,
you
let me
help?
add another thing. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to ask. So what if you help them with the answer? Because that question you just asked could be kind of hard to answer. So you could say, so think back to when you were something that happened in your business or something that happened when you were a kid, like kind of
Sure,
help them
sure.
find the answer. Is that a good technique?
Of course, of course. And I was just trying to illustrate a question that probably no one, unless they've shared that answer before, is going to be ready to answer it 2 or 3 seconds.
Hmm.
In many questions we ask, you've got to let them have time to think and be relaxed about it.
Hmm.
And Elise, I always like to add that, some of your listeners, our listeners today, are actually going to be frustrated with the 8 second rule because, up to now, they've been in oblivion like I was. And
Hmm.
so later today, they're going to ask somebody a question. At 2 or 3 seconds, they're going to start talking again. And then they're going to remember the 8 second rule and they're going to think, darn that, Tiede. Well, Lisa, here's another confession. It still happens to me. But what I do when I find I've just violated it is I will say, time out, my bad. I asked you a question. I didn't even give you time to answer, and I started talking again. Please forgive me. Here's the question again. This time, I'll keep quiet. You take all the time you need to answer. I've never had anyone be unforgiving, and I'm just saying it still happens. But so if that happens to anyone who's trying to apply the 8 second rule, just use the workaround when you violate it.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. So you mentioned the word relaxing. So this actually is a good segue into my next topic. And I have a cat on my table, so let me just get her. She likes this topic, apparently. Um, so my podcast focuses a lot on merger and acquisition, integration, and transitions. And really, we're talking about transitional periods of time where leaders, especially, are thrown into situations. There's a lot of fractional leaders that are existing. There's a lot of pressure on them to build trust with a team they don't know very quickly. And I would think this is a really good opportunity actually to ask a lot of questions really
Yeah.
quickly. But you also mentioned the relaxing. If you can be relaxed, like, I mean, part of being a leader, I think, is helping the team feel a certain way so that you get the results that you want. You know what I mean? So like if a leader is stressed out, that's going to reflect on the team. If a leader is relaxed, that, and I'm probably getting into some other topics besides just asking questions, but I think the being relaxed and asking the questions and taking the time to do that maybe would speed up the building trust. But a lot of people kind of skip over. I mean, it's kind of a habit to skip over all that stuff, even planning. I mean, I could go on and on about the lack of planning, and if you just plan and strategize, then you could all this would happen quicker in the end, right? It's just taking that time in the beginning. So, what would you say during those sort of high pressure, high stakes, must act quickly? The tendency would be to go back to the control mode of leadership, skip over a lot of questions, not care too much about the people that may or may not end up being on the team in 3 months, that kind of
Yeah.
environment. So
Well, Lisa,
what do you
your
say to that?
question reminds me of a situation. Navy Captain Michael D. Abrashoff was given the command of the USS Benfold, one of our nation's modern warships. And when he took command, or maybe just before he took command, the Navy has a system, a method of measuring morale on every ship. And morale on that ship was the absolute lowest of all some 300 vessels in the U.S. Navy. And Captain Avashoff takes command. 18 months later, under his command, retested, morale was the highest of all ships in the U.S. Navy. He literally took the morale of that ship from worst to first. How did he do it? Well, you asked kind of, upon taking command, as he stepped in, the first thing he did was he set up 300 one-on-one meetings with the 300 sailors on his ship. And in those one-on-one meetings, scheduled to last about 15 minutes each, he asked them 3 questions. Now, by the end of the first day, he might have only had time to have 10 or 15 of these meetings. There was a whole bunch more meetings to take place, but there was already a buzz on the ship. The new captain, he's different. He's actually asking us for input. And here were his 3 questions. And Lisa, you earlier memorized the 4 questions to lead with questions. You're going to have these memorized instantly also. His 3 questions: what do you like best about this ship? What do you like least? What would you change if you could? Now, he did not promise to make every change he heard. But as he's listening and he's hearing the suggested changes, he's thinking, what? What do you mean? We're going to fix that. But Lisa, when he began to announce changes, pulled all the sailors together, guess who he gave credit to for the ideas? The sailors.
The sailors.
Mm-hmm. Named them by name, had them stand up and say, Lisa, we're going to use your idea. We're going to execute on that. Now, Lisa, imagine you're a new sailor on that ship, and let's just say you're short. You're only 5'2". At that moment, how tall would you feel? 10 foot. And Lisa, at first opportunity to call home, what are you going to be telling your mama? You won't believe it. The captain called me by name, had me stand up, and we had met a few weeks earlier, and he said, we're going to implement your idea. Wow. Well, you just hear that and you think, well, of course morale on that ship had to increase. And I think, going back to stepping into a new role, instead of stepping in with, hey, let me tell you everything I'm going to do, and they're thinking, who died and made you king, even though, yeah, you have the position. But stepping into that new role, and the first thing is having individual meeting. Hey, what do you like best about our company, our organization? What do you like least? What would you change if you could? And listening. And Lisa, another piece of research is really fascinating to me. And that is, generally speaking, a staff member will support a decision opposite of their input if they were given opportunity to give input prior to the decision being made. Isn't that fascinating? Where you get the pushback is when you make a decision and you haven't given a chance for any input. And, sometimes a leader will make a decision. They'll call a staff meetings, announce the change, ask if there's any questions. They think the questions will be about executing the decision. But instead, hey, did you think about this when you made this decision? And they're kind of between a rock and a hard place. It's like they're thinking to themselves, no, I didn't think about that, but I'm the boss. And I don't want to cave. So, yeah, we're still going forward with this. But you can avoid that awkward thing by ahead of time saying, hey, we're thinking about making a change in this area. What should we be considering? And you get all that input up front. It does allow you to make a better decision. You still get to make the decision, but perhaps it's going to be opposite some of the input. And yet, because they felt respected and being asked up front, they'll actually support that decision.
Yeah, and it reminds me of a quote. So I don't remember who said this or how the quote actually goes, but it's something about people don't necessarily remember what you said, but they always remember how you made them feel or how you felt
Yeah.
during that time. And to me, you're kind of touching on that because, like you said, listening is, asking questions and being genuinely interested in somebody's input makes them feel so much better, and it was it's going to have a positive impact on the morale for sure. So that kind of reminded me of that. Feelings are really important in this in this topic, I think.
They are. In leadership, emotional intelligence,
Hmm.
uh, I think, is as important as just intelligence.
Hmm.
Um, Knowing how to relate to people and how to affirm them, how to have a staff member feel valued.
Hmm.
And staff that feel valued, I mean, the leader is giving him or herself a gift to have staff that feel valued because they're going to work so much harder because they feel valued.
Right, exactly. So is there a time, do you think, when taking charge would be appropriate instead of asking questions?
Of course. Of course. Lisa, another thing, whenever I speak, I start early with two questions. And I actually have my audience, I put my cell phone number on the screen, and I say, I've got two questions. First question is, in leading, what are the values of telling? And there are. It's quicker in training somebody to do something never done before. Saying, hey, how do you think you ought to do this is not, at that point, not very helpful. And so there's tremendous value in certain things in telling. And then the second question is say, in leading, what are the values of asking questions? And I get a whole bunch. And then I ask a trick question. I say, which is better? And almost everyone says asking questions. And then the next picture on the screen is a picture of a passenger plane. And I say, now when you're flying, which wing is more important?
Hmm.
Right wing or the
Oh.
left wing?
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
like they better both be perfect or I'm not getting on that plane.
Hmm.
And I say, so it is in leading. We need both. The wisdom, though, is knowing when to tell and when to ask.
Hmm.
And then I go on to say, if you can imagine your right arm to be your telling arm, I'm guessing
Hmm.
for most of us it's well developed. But if you can imagine your left arm to be your asking arm, I'm guessing for most of us we'd say it doesn't have equal strength to my telling arm.
Hmm.
And so today we're going to focus on strengthening the asking arm,
Hmm.
not because you don't need telling, but because you're good to go there.
Right.
And
Okay. Yeah, that makes
but the
sense.
fact is, Lisa, you need both.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about a hard situation where you're trying to get concerns. There's issues on the team and you're trying to surface concerns. So do you have some types of questions or like ways to ask questions to surface concerns without creating anxiety?
I just keep it simple. And some of the questions we already had. Hey, we're thinking of making changes in this area. What do you all think? What input? What should we be looking at? And you listen. In other words, you give a chance for if the pot is about to explode, you're giving a chance to release
Hmm.
some of that steam
Hmm.
and listen. And of course, as you're genuinely listening, the fact is your staff will be doing you a great service or your colleagues. In that, they're going to raise things you hadn't thought about that will then allow you to make a better decision. Again, when there's, let's say, high anxiety on something, a situation or whatever, again, just meeting and saying, hey, gang, talk to me. What should we be examining here? What should we be looking at? It goes back to something you said early in our conversation. Are you experiencing your leader as relaxed?
Hmm.
If you are, then the team is going to feel more relaxed. It's like, hey, we're going to figure this out. let's meet. What should we be
Right.
looking at? And the leader's relaxed, and it's like, okay, we're going to figure this out. There is hope
Mhm. Right.
versus, coming in and, man, we got this major problem and I don't know what to do, but we better get
Mhm.
it figured out now.
Yeah.
Ah, the whole team gets anxious.
Let's try to help some people that are prone to anxiety and fear. So there are some people that are afraid of opening Pandora's box, so to speak. So maybe they avoid questions or certain questions, or they don't want to go too deep. How can a leader be better at not being afraid to ask questions?
I think a couple of things, and Lisa, I bet you have answers on this too. And if we had other guests here, I'd be saying, hey, what do you all think? It's
Hmm.
not like I think I have the one right answer here,
Hmm.
but in contributing to the conversation versus Bob is telling us the right answer, I think in that situation, again, by opening it up, hey, what do you all think we might do here? And then here's another thing. Sometimes leaders will say, well, what if my staff member shares an idea that I don't think will work? How do I respond then? And I remember back to my first position, the leader I had, wonderful leader, he would respond to what he thought was a bad idea with this statement. He'd say, Bob, that's an idea. And then he'd move on.
Oh, okay.
And
Right.
but I think, hey, that's one option, Lisa. What might be two or three other options? In other words, helping that staff member or the team
Hmm.
rather than here's the first idea, we've got to go with it. Hey, Lisa, yeah, that's a great idea. What would be a couple other options?
Hmm.
And then, realizing a leader still can make the decision.
Hmm.
You're not forced to use one of the options of your team. And then also, if it's in a team situation, wow, Lisa, that's one option. What would you think are a couple of others? And
Hmm.
team, what might even be some other options here? Then there's three words, Lisa, in getting input that I'm kind of fascinated with because they're so similar.
Hmm.
Given a situation, we could ask, hey, Lisa, what should we do here? Or we could ask, hey, Lisa, what might we do here? Or thirdly, we could ask, Lisa, what could we do here? Now you could think they're almost the same, but let's examine them for just a moment. When we say, what should we do here? The staff member may be hesitant to answer because it seems like there's one right answer, and I'm not sure what it is. But if we say, what might we do? Well, then I can throw out some ideas of might because I don't have to defend them as the should answer that we should do. But even with both of those, should and might, it tends to be here would be ideal things. And what's fascinating is that last question, what could we do, is based on like, hey, what could we do today? In other words, given the current resources we have, instead of ideal, if we had all the money and all the time, we should do this. But what could we do allows us to examine, oh, yeah, we could do this today based on what we already have in hand. But again, back to your question, asking the staff, I prefer often rather than should to ask either might or could, because should often feels like one right answer. But also in might, you're inviting a brainstorming
Yeah.
versus hearing that first thing and everybody thinks, okay, if the boss says that's the one,
Hmm.
discussion over.
Right.
You really want to have more discussion, get more
Mhm.
input before you land on a certain thing.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's really a mindset. I mean, the leader's mindset matters because that's going to determine whether they're able to ask a lot of questions or even have that open sort of conversation. I would say that something that I've learned is if I'm afraid to do something or if I'm uncomfortable with it, I should just do it, because every time that I do it and I get through it, I'm better the next time. So knowing that asking the questions are going to have a positive impact, and you're afraid, you're not comfortable with leading that way yet, then just try it. Just do it anyway. I always tell my daughter when she's afraid to do something, just pretend you're brave. If you're not brave, just pretend you're brave, and eventually you'll
Love
become
that.
brave at
Yeah.
it. I've been telling her that since she was, 4 years old.
Yes.
Um, so let's talk a little bit about, I know this is maybe kind of a side topic, but are there questions not to ask? I'm trying to cover like all the angles here on the question. So are there things not to ask? Like what's not appropriate or what's not going to get you good answers? Like how do you ask questions that are like you would not recommend certain kind of questions?
Wow, that's a fascinating question, Lisa. I don't know that I've been asked that before. I don't know that I have a ready answer. I'll go
I'll wait.
down one
I'll
angle,
wait
but
eight
this,
seconds. I'll wait eight
yes,
seconds.
uh, I'll go down one angle. Here's something I advise speakers not to do, not to ask, is at the end of their speech, not to ask, are there any questions? And you think, wait a minute, the leading with question guy just told me not to ask questions. Yes, because I've seen so often, Lisa, incredible speech, great introduction. They told great stories. They made great points. It's like 10, 10, 10. And then they get to the wrap up and say, so are there any questions? And you hear crickets,
Mm.
nothing. And they wait a while and there's still nothing. And they say, well, thank you. And they walk off the stage. Their speech ended with a nosedive. They shot themselves in their foot and it was
Mm.
self-inflicted. And so I never end a speech with, are there any questions?
Hmm. That's a good
Uh,
answer. Hmm.
yeah. Instead, I end most of my speeches with, again, I've used my cell phone and I say, hey, I've got one more question for you to answer. And that is, of all the things you've heard today, what's one thing you're going to execute on and implement? Send that
Mm.
to me. And again, in an audience, it's not that you're going to hear from everybody, but quickly you're going to have 10, 15, 20, 50, depending how large the audience. Now, I don't read them all, but I'll usually read
Mm.
the first 10 that I receive. Wow. Lisa says, John says, Sally says. And so I am ending, but it's a different kind of question rather than are there any questions? But so that's one example. But I'm sure as I would think about it, there'd be more times. Yeah, I guess going back as I'm thinking about it, when you're training somebody to do something new, you don't start with questions. In an emergency situation, there's a fire in the building. You don't pull the team together and say, what do you all think we might do? I'd like to
Hmm.
hear some options. At that point, it's
Hmm.
follow me. Here's the way
Hmm.
out. And if you don't
Hmm.
know the way out, you're hoping somebody else knows the way out. The janitor could be the leader at that point. So there's emergency situations. But Lisa, how about you? Are you thinking of some situations in which not to ask questions?
I don't know. I think the one that you said about the speech, because I hear that a lot. Does anyone have any questions at the end of the speech? That was an excellent insight right there for me. So, that's kind of my takeaway from my question to you.
Yeah.
Um, so what about curiosity? So are there like I'm trying to give my audience some sort of things that they can take back to make them better, right? So like what are some like small habits that a leader can build like daily, like to keep curiosity alive, under pressure, or keep that sort of question mentality in their sort of daily as a daily habit?
Lisa, a small thing, you used the word curiosity,
Mm-hmm.
and I will frequently use that word. I'll say, Lisa, I'm curious. What are you thinking we might do about this? Or
Hmm.
Lisa, I'm curious. What do you love most about what you're doing here? Lisa, I'm curious. You've been here a bunch of years. What are you seeing that you wish we were doing that we're not? And just that
Mm-hmm.
phrase, hey, I'm curious, and then the question. I think it softens the question a bit in the right way. It's okay. Bob's motivation is he's curious versus, hey, Lisa, you've been here a while. What do you think we ought to do? By
Hmm.
itself is the same question, but to me, it feels different when I start with, Lisa, I'm really curious. You've been
Hmm.
here a while. What are you seeing that we're not doing that
Hmm.
you wish we were? To me, it feels different, but I love to use that phrase, hey, I'm
Hmm.
curious, because I am.
Okay, so kind of a final topic question that I'd like to talk about is asking yourself questions, like as a self-reflection exercise. I know I've learned through some classes and things, ask yourself these questions. So one of the questions is, what am I pretending not to know? Asking. So do you have any advice around like asking yourself questions and make yourself realize things that you don't maybe realize about yourself?
Well, Lisa, I have a question that I ask myself every morning, and it prepares me for every day. I love the scriptures. There's a scripture that says, "Man plans his way, but God orders his footsteps." And my question in prayer every morning is, let me see the people that are placed in my path today. Let me not be so focused on my agenda that I miss seeing people. And just that, having that awareness. And it's not like, yeah, maybe I'm opening the door for a mother. That's not a conversation. It's, you could say that's not a big deal, but it's in the course of the day, let me see versus being so focused on my schedule, my agenda that I miss seeing people.
Hmm.
Now, for others, situations, it's a phone call. It's coming in contact with a friend. It's somebody reaching out to say, hey, Bob, could I have a conversation with you? Instead of it all has to fit into my agenda and my plan, my goal is no, let me be curious to see these people who
Hmm.
cross my path. Oh, Lisa, another thing, going down that just a bit further, is I have a little talk I do from time to time. It's more like a lunch and learn exercise, but it's like, hey, Lisa, make a list of your 10 most meaningful relationships outside your family. And don't worry if tomorrow you think, oh, I forgot George. You'll be fine with the 10 you
Hmm.
come up with. You can add George tomorrow.
Hmm.
So once they have their list, I then say, how many of these people are because you had a strategy? And mind you, there's nothing, strategies are good, but a strategy relationship would be like, hey, Bob, do you know Sam? I'm wanting to meet Sam. Bob, would you introduce me to Sam? Lisa, I'd be happy to introduce you to Sam. That would be a result of a strategy. The second kind, though, is God ordered our footsteps. Yeah, I don't recall a plan, but we met at Starbucks. We started a
Hmm.
conversation. She's become one of my best friends. Met at a conference, sat on an airplane. What's really fascinating, Lisa, is for most people, of their list of 10, 8 or 9 are no strategy. We just
Hmm.
crossed paths.
Hmm.
And so I'm going back, I've elaborated a little too long, but one of my self questions is, Bob, are you seeing the people in your path?
Hmm.
And appreciating that
Hmm.
there may be an opportunity, and the opportunity doesn't have to be for my benefit. Who are people I might serve?
Hmm.
That would be one.
Hmm.
Maybe you have a couple.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's really good insight. So, thanks for being here, Bob. And I'd like to give you an opportunity to let the audience know where they can find your books and anything else you'd like to share.
Well, thank you, Lisa. Yes. My blog, last
Hmm.
week we celebrated the 13th anniversary of leadingwithquestions.com, followed by leaders in over 200 countries. And I invite leaders everywhere to subscribe. If you just go to leadingwithquestions.com, run those words together, leadingwithquestions.com, cursor down a bit, you will see a place to enter your email, click subscribe, and you'll be joining those leaders. Subscribing is free. And into your inbox every Monday and Thursday will come what I call turnkey ready questions that you can turn around to ask staff, colleagues, clients, prospects, friends, or family. Not that one set will work with all those, but a variety. And usually those are wrapped in a story. It's the story that kind of lets us know, how that question's been used, how the effect that question has. It's usually the story that motivates me to look around. Who could I ask?
Hmm.
But invite them. And then I've written 5, soon to be 6 free ebooks.
Hmm.
And they're available again if you go to leadingwithquestions.com. If you click, you'll see the word books at the top. Click on that, and you then will have instant access to Great Leaders Ask Questions. Now that's a great question. 340 questions Jesus
Hmm.
asked, and in a bunch of other. In the newest book,
And this one, don't forget. This one's
yes, the
really
newest
small.
book, yes, the little book of big leading with question quotes. You'll have access to that. Then, Lisa, we've also referred the third edition of
Hmm.
leadingwithquestions.com is available on Amazon or wherever books are sold.
Hmm.
And we've been told by Amazon that it has been in the top 3 of all leadership books in the area of business communication.
Hmm.
And so, love for you to go and buy Leading with Questions,
Hmm.
Amazon, or wherever books are sold. But Lisa, it's been an honor to be your guest. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So, a huge thank you to Bob Tiede for joining us and sharing so many great stories and practical tips. I'm feeling fired up to start asking way better questions. If you want more of Bob's wisdom, grab a copy of the third edition of Leading with Questions and my favorite, his little book on Amazon. And definitely check out his website and free ebooks at leadingwithquestions.com. If you like today's episode, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next episodes. Thanks again for tuning in. And remember, sometimes the best move you can make as a leader is simply just asking a really great question. See you next time.